On the morning of June 30th, 1953, in a customer delivery garage in Flint, Michigan, not a proper assembly plant, a garage, a Chevrolet worker named Tony Kleiber climbed into a white roadster and drove it off a makeshift pilot line. The car had no exterior door handles, no roll-up windows. The body was made of a strange new plastic material most Americans had never heard of, and under the long white hood sat the least glamorous piece of machinery General Motors owned, a tuned-up version of the same cast-iron six-cylinder that had been hauling Chevrolet pickup trucks, taxis, and school buses around America for decades. That car was the first Chevrolet Corvette, America's sports car. The fiberglass legend, the car that would one day humiliate Ferraris. It launched with a truck engine and a two-speed automatic. It was sold by invitation only to celebrities and VIPs at a price nobody wanted to pay. Within 2 years, hundreds of them sat unsold on dealer lots, and inside General Motors, executives were quietly preparing to kill it. The Corvette was saved by 3 things, in this order: an enemy, an immigrant, and an engine. The enemy was built by Ford. The immigrant had spent the 1940s fixing Henry Ford's flathead V8, and if you've seen our flathead file, you already know his name. And the engine? Well, the engine became the most successful V8 in the history of the automobile. This is the story of how America's sports cars survived being born wrong. And it starts, like most great Detroit stories, with an executive who saw something in Europe that made him jealous. So, here's the setup. It's the early 1950s, and America, the country that builds most of the cars on planet Earth, does not build a sports car. Think about how strange that is. American factories are the envy of the industrial world. American V8s power everything from Cadillacs to stock car racing. And yet, if a young American wants a small, nimble, open two-seater, a car that exists purely for the joy of driving, his money leaves the country. It goes to England for an MG or a Jaguar XK120. It goes to Italy. It goes anywhere but Detroit. And there were a lot of young Americans wanting exactly that. Hundreds of thousands of GIs had come home from Europe having seen and in many cases driven and shipped home little British roadsters that weighed nothing, steered like thoughts, and made driving an event instead of a chore. Sports car clubs were sprouting across the country. Road racing was taking hold at places like Watkins Glen. Now, let's be honest about the framing before somebody types it in the comments. Was there literally no American sports car in 1953? There were fragments. The tiny Crosley Hotshot had come and gone. The Nash Healey was a low-volume Anglo-American hybrid, American engine, British chassis, Italian body, a few hundred a year. Kaiser's fiberglass Darren was around the corner, built by a company that was dying. What America did not have, what no major American automaker had even attempted, was a real, mass-produced sports car wearing a Detroit badge. The biggest car industry on Earth had surrendered an entire category without firing a shot. One man at General Motors took that personally. His name was Harley Earl, and he was the most powerful car designer who ever lived. Harley Earl invented the job of car designer as we know it. 6'4", Hollywood-raised, he'd started out building custom bodies for movie stars. Earl ran GM's styling empire like a studio chief, and his word shaped what tens of millions of Americans drove. Tail fins? Earl. The dream car concept? Earl. The annual model change that kept America trading in perfectly good cars? Earl perfected it. And in the early 50s, Harley Earl fell in love with sports cars. He'd seen the European machines, seen the young Americans lusting after them, and by several accounts, a trip to the great European races crystallized the obsession. His idea was almost populist, not another expensive toy for the country club set, but an American sports car a working guy could afford. The early target talked about inside GM was under $2,000. A sports car built the Chevrolet way, high volume, low price. Earl put a small team on it in secrecy under the deliberately boring code name Project Opal. The car took shape fast, a low, clean roadster with a toothy grille and rocket ship taillights. And it had one genuinely radical feature. The body would be made not of steel, but of glass-reinforced plastic, fiberglass. Lightweight, rust-proof, cheap to tool up compared to steel dies, and completely unproven for a production automobile. No major automaker on Earth had ever mass-produced a fiberglass-bodied car. Chevrolet was about to be the first, essentially by improvisation. There was even internal debate, and this detail is delicious, about whether the car should wear a Chevrolet badge at all or a Cadillac one. Chevrolet won because Chevrolet needed it more. The division's image was sensible, dependable, and dull, and a halo sports car was exactly the medicine. In January 1953, the prototype, internally EX-122, went on stage at GM's Motorama show at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds mobbed it. Letters poured in. GM, drunk on the response, greenlit production on a timeline that can only be described as reckless. The show car in January, real cars by June. 6 months. And that schedule, that beautiful, insane schedule, is where the truck engine comes in. Here's the situation the engineers faced. A sports car lives and dies by its engine. And in 1953, Chevrolet, the division building America's sports car, had exactly one engine to its name. It was called the Stovebolt 6, a 235 cubic inch cast iron inline-six cylinder whose family tree went back to 1929. An engine designed for one purpose, to be indestructible and cheap in the highest volume vehicles in America. In pickups, it was badged the Thriftmaster. Thriftmaster. Let that word roll around for a second. The engine chosen to power America's answer to Jaguar carried a name that meant master of not spending money. It powered Chevy trucks, Chevy taxis, Chevy sedans, Chevy everything. It was the automotive equivalent of a work boot. Chevrolet had no V8, hadn't built one since a brief, failed experiment before World War I. The division's modern V8 was still 2 years away in the future, and there was no time and no budget to engineer a proper sports car engine from scratch. So, Chief Engineer Ed Cole's team did the only thing the calendar allowed. They hot-rodded the truck engine. To be fair to them, they hot-rodded it sincerely. Higher compression, a hotter camshaft, better valves, and, most visibly, 3 Carter YH side draft carburetors lined up along the manifold, genuine speed shop hardware on a taxi engine. The result was rechristened with a name considerably more romantic than Thriftmaster, the Blue Flame 6. Output, 150 horsepower. Respectable for 1953, roughly what a Jaguar XK120 had brought to America a few years earlier, if a great deal less exotic in how it got there. And then came the transmission, the single decision that haunted the early Corvette more than any other. The only gearbox offered was the Power Glide, a 2-speed automatic. In a sports car. Chevrolet's official explanation, repeated ever since, was that none of its manual transmissions could reliably handle the hopped-up engine's output on that timeline. Whatever the full truth, the optics were fatal. Every sports car America admired, every MG, every Jaguar, every Ferrari, had a manual gearbox as a matter of identity. The Corvette launched with the transmission of a Bel Air sedan. A truck engine and a slush box, wrapped in a plastic body, wearing the most beautiful shape in America. The Corvette was a gorgeous contradiction, and the market was about to say so. The 1953 production run was barely production at all. 300 cars, assembled essentially by hand in that Flint garage, while the real factory in St. Louis was prepared. Every single one was identical. Polo white paint, sportsman red interior, black canvas top. Every single one had the same 2 options, a heater at $91.40 and a $145.15 AM radio, which were installed on all 300 cars, making them options in name only. Sticker price, $3,498. Remember Harley Earl's dream of a sports car for under $2,000? The dream had nearly doubled on its way to the showroom. And you couldn't even buy one. Chevrolet, wanting the car seen in the right driveways, restricted the 1953 cars to VIPs and celebrities, invitation only. It's one of the strangest launches in automotive history, a car built to democratize the sports car, sold like a country club membership. The cars themselves, being hand-built prototypes in all but name, leaked. Water came in around the side curtains. There were no roll-up windows, just removable panels, with little openings the owner's manuals cheerfully treated as features. Fiberglass panel fit varied car to car. The doors, lacking exterior handles, opened by reaching inside. Charming in California, less so in a Michigan January. In 1954, production moved to St. Louis, and Chevrolet planned for volume. Internal hopes ran to roughly 10,000 cars a year. They built 3,640, and they couldn't even sell those. By year's end, roughly a third of the entire production run sat unsold on dealer lots, brand new Corvettes, gathering dust, discounted, unloved. The sports car crowd had driven it and shrugged. Pretty, but a two-speed automatic and a truck-derived 6 made it a boulevard cruiser in a racing costume. The luxury crowd found it crude, side curtains at Cadillac money. The car had been built for everyone and landed with no one. Inside General Motors, the knives came out. The Corvette was a money-losing embarrassment, and by 1954 and into 1955, serious discussions were underway about killing the program entirely. Production for 1955 tells you how close it came. 700 cars. 700, from the biggest car maker on Earth. The Corvette was a rounding error awaiting a memo. And it would have died, except that in the fall of 1954, Ford did Chevrolet the greatest favor in the history of their rivalry. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. Engine Files opens a story like this every week. Engines that were banned, killed, or born wrong and saved anyway. Okay, because here comes the rescue, and it arrives from three directions at once.
On September 23, 1954, Ford unveiled the Thunderbird. 2 seats, crisp, elegant styling, a V8 engine, a real one under the hood with a manual transmission available, roll-up windows, a removable hardtop. Ford, watching Chevrolet stumble, had aimed not at the sports car purist, but at the boulevard. They called it a personal car, not a sports car, and the aim was perfect. For the 1955 model year, the Thunderbird outsold the Corvette by a score that wasn't a score, it was an execution. 16,155 Thunderbirds, 700 Corvettes, 23-1. And that humiliation is precisely what saved the Corvette's life. Because General Motors in 1955 was the most powerful industrial enterprise on Earth, and its executives could tolerate losing money far more easily than losing face to Ford, of all companies, in a category GM had entered first. Killing the Corvette now wouldn't read as a pruning a failed experiment, it would read as surrender. The program that had been circling the drain suddenly had the one thing corporate logic respects, a rival to beat. If you've watched our GT40 file, you know exactly how this movie goes. Wounded corporate pride is the most powerful fuel in Detroit, and Ford was about to get a decade-long demonstration of it from the other direction. But pride alone doesn't fix a truck engine. For that, the Corvette needed the other two rescuers, and they arrived together. In January 1953, among the crowd circling the Motorama Corvette at the Waldorf Astoria stood a 43-year-old engineer with one of the great backstories in automotive history. Zora Arkus-Duntov was born in Brussels to Russian parents and raised in Leningrad. The family later moved west through Germany as Europe convulsed. He studied engineering in Berlin, watching the rise of the Nazis from close range. When war came, he flew for the French Air Force. When France fell, he and his family escaped through the chaos to New York in 1940. And there, with his brother Yura, he founded a small engineering firm, Ardun, whose most famous product regular viewers of this channel have already met, the beautiful overhead valve conversion heads that cured the Ford Flathead V8's original sin. The man now standing in the Waldorf ballroom had two simultaneous reactions. The shape thrilled him. The engineering underneath, the truck 6, the 2-speed automatic, the sedan-derived chassis, disappointed him almost personally. Most engineers would have muttered about it to their friends. Duntov went home and wrote to Chevrolet,
to Chief Engineer Ed Cole's organization, essentially telling the biggest car company in the world what was wrong with its new baby and how he would fix it. Instead of a rejection letter, he got a job. By May 1953, Zora Arkus-Duntov was a GM engineer. And within months, he'd written the internal memo that became scripture, a paper titled Thoughts Pertaining to Youth, Hot Rodders, and Chevrolet. Its argument, compressed, an entire generation of young Americans is building hot rods out of Ford parts because Ford's V8 is cheap and everywhere. They grow up loyal to Ford. If Chevrolet wants that generation, Chevrolet must give them speed parts, performance, and something to believe in. The memo read the post-war hot rod culture, the dry lakes, the speed shops, the junkyard V8s, as a market forecast. 60 years of Chevrolet performance history unfolded more or less exactly as that memo prescribed. Duntov's philosophy for the struggling sports car was a single sentence he repeated for the rest of his life. To establish a sports car, you have to race it. But racing the Blue Flame 6 was not a serious proposition. What Duntov needed, what the whole Corvette needed, was arriving from Ed Cole's engine lab at that very moment. For 1955, Chevrolet finally, at long last, had a V8. Ed Cole's team had designed it for the entire passenger line, and they had designed it in a state of grace. The plan had called for a smaller engine. Cole personally pushed the displacement to 265 cubic inches. It was compact, it was simple to manufacture, its short-stroke bottom end spun happily to 6,000 RPM, unheard of territory for an American family car engine. And here's the detail that still makes engineers smile. The new V8 was lighter than the old cast-iron 6 it replaced. 8 cylinders, more power, less weight. In the Corvette, wearing a 4-barrel carburetor, it made 195 horsepower, and it transformed the car so completely that the factory advertised the difference in the fender batch with an exaggerated golden V in the word Chevrolet. The market's verdict inside that disastrous 700-car 1955 run is the most lopsided vote in Corvette history. Of the 700 built, all but 6 had the V8. 6 customers on planet Earth chose the Blue Flame. The truck engine's reign was over the instant an alternative existed. Late in the year, a 3-speed manual finally arrived too, and with those 2 changes, the 2 original sins of 1953 were both absolved. Contemporary measures of the transformation border on comedy. The kind of acceleration run that took the automatic 6 the better part of a minute was nearly cut in half. This engine, the small-block Chevy, deserves its own file, and it will get one, because what it became is barely believable. The engine that powered Corvettes and pickups and race cars and boats for generations, produced in numbers counted in the tens of millions, arguably the most successful V8 designed in history. But in 1955, it had one job: save the plastic sports car. It did. Duntov made sure the world noticed. For 1956, the Corvette got a stunning restyle: roll-up windows at last, real door handles, the classic scalloped flanks, and Duntov took a modified car to Daytona Beach, the same sand where Plessy Cummins' diesel had made headlines a quarter-century earlier and ran better than 150 miles per hour. The camshaft he ground for that effort entered the catalog and the language, the Duntov cam, chosen by just 111 buyers in 1956, cars that collectors now hunt like relics. In 1957 came fuel injection and the magic advertising number: 1 horsepower per cubic inch. The car that couldn't sell 700 units in 1955 was by the end of the decade winning at Sabrine and being spoken of, without laughter, in the same sentences as Europe's best. And the Thunderbird? Ford looked at the sales charts, concluded the real money was in comfort, and for 1958 added a back seat. The Thunderbird became a 4-seat luxury cruiser and never raced anybody again. In the war between America's 2 two-seaters, Chevrolet won by the oldest strategy there is. It was the one that refused to stop being a sports car.
Think about the full arc of this thing. The largest car industry on Earth ignores an entire category until a Hollywood-bred designer forces the issue with a plastic-bodied dream car.
The dream is greenlit on a 6-month schedule that guarantees compromise, so America's sports car is born wearing a hot-rodded taxi engine named after thrift and a 2-speed automatic named after a sedan. It's sold to celebrities at double its intended price, it leaks on its owners, and within 2 years it's a discount lot orphan that its own company is preparing to bury. And then every ingredient of its failure gets inverted. The rival built to finish it off, the Thunderbird, instead shames General Motors into saving it. The engineer who arrives to fix it is a Russian-raised immigrant who made his name perfecting Ford's V8, hired off the strength of an unsolicited letter of complaint. And the engine that redeems it isn't a bespoke racing jewel, but the ultimate Chevrolet product, a cheap, brilliant, mass-produced V8 that happened to be exactly what a sports car needed and what an entire performance culture would be built on. Here's the last irony, and it's the one that ties this whole file together. The Corvette survived because it finally got the thing Duntov's famous memo described, an engine young America could believe in. The flathead Ford had owned that role for 20 years. We told you that story. And we told you how the small block Chevy took the junkyard crown from it after 1955. The Corvette wasn't just saved by the small block. The Corvette was the announcement of the small block, the halo over the engine that would define American speed for half a century. The car everyone calls America's sports car was really America's engine wearing a fiberglass suit. Today, the arithmetic of 1953 has fully reversed. The unsellable $3,498 white Roadster is one of the most valuable American production cars in existence. Of the original 300, roughly 225 are believed to survive, and clean examples trade well into 6 figures, with the finest far beyond. Blue flame cars, once the punchline, are now cherished precisely because they're the awkward beginning. Somewhere tonight, a 70-year-old fiberglass body that once sat unwanted on a dealer lot is the crown jewel of somebody's collection, truck engine and all. And there you have it. America had no sports car in 1953, so Chevrolet built one out of a show car, a plastic body, and a hot-rodded truck engine, nearly killed it, and then watched an enemy, an immigrant, and a V8 turn the mistake into the longest-running sports car nameplate in the world. 70 years on, every Corvette still traces back to 300 hand-built white Roadsters and the least sporting engine in America. If you or your father owned a C1, Blue Flame, or V8, tell me in the comments. What did it cost then, and what would it be worth now? And did anyone out there actually drive a Powerglide 6? Defend it if you dare. If you made it this far, subscribe. We open a new file every week.